if the light on the mountain isn't supernatural at all, but neurological? Maybe it's time to consider the science of awe, the biology of ego dissolution, and the ethical responsibility that comes with enlightenment. If transcendence is part of our brain's wiring, then the main question isn't whether it's real. The main question is, what are we supposed to do with it? Welcome to another bonus edition of the MTB Podcast, a segment of the weekly episode that I call Afterthoughts. This is my favorite part of these weekly presentations because it gives me a chance to dig a little bit deeper into something that came up during the main episode. So what if I told you that the Transfiguration, the radiant light, the mystical vision, the overwhelming sense of awe might not be proof of divinity, but rather proof of something far more fascinating? What if that mountaintop moment with Jesus and his disciples isn't a supernatural interruption of nature, but a perfectly natural function of the human brain? And what if understanding that doesn't make the experience smaller, but actually makes it a little bit more powerful? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Human beings are wired for transcendence. We can trigger it with meditation, with music, with trauma, with psychedelics, with magnetic stimulation of the temporal lobes. We can literally light up the brain and induce the feeling of a presence. So the real question isn't whether the light on the mountain was real. The question is, what does it mean that we carry the capacity for that light inside our own biology? And here's where it gets ethically dangerous. If mountaintop experiences are part of our neurological wiring, then chasing those experiences becomes kind of easy, addictive even. But the story doesn't end on the mountain. It always descends into the valley. So tonight, we're going to talk about the science of awe, the illusion of the glowing ego, and the moral responsibility that comes with enlightenment. Because if you've seen the light, you don't get to keep it for yourself. So let's dive into that in this episode of Afterthoughts. All right, let's talk about the mountaintop experience. In Matthew 17, we get the transfiguration of Jesus. Jesus glowing, radiant light, Moses and Elijah appearing, the disciples overwhelmed, terrified even. Peter blurts out something awkward and tries to build shelters to freeze the moment in place. Now, traditionally, this is treated as a supernatural event. Proof of divine identity, cosmic authority, heaven breaking into earth. But what if we treat it as data? Let's just treat it as a human event. Let's demythologize this. Okay, radiant light, that's photopsia. Flashes of light that can occur during intense neurological activity. Seeing archetypal figures, well, that maps beautifully onto how the brain constructs symbolic presences when the boundaries of self seem to loosen, which we'll talk more about in a moment. A profound sense of unity followed by fear, that's classic peak experience pattern. When you look at it this way, the story reads less like a physics violation and more like a neurological episode. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. There is a network in the brain called the default mode network, the DMN. Think of it as the self center. It's the part of the brain that maintains your sense of being a separate individual. It runs the narrative voice in your head. We all have that, right? The voice, the running narrative that goes on in our heads, that's the DMN. It maintains ego boundaries. It keeps me separate from everything else. When people meditate deeply, when they experience awe, when they undergo trauma, when they use psychedelics, or even when they engage in extreme prayer practices, the DMN, the default mode network, goes quiet. Neuroscientists have monitored it. They know it happens. And when the DMN goes quiet, the boundary between me and the rest of the world starts to dissolve. When that happens, people report feelings of oneness, radiance, unity, and transcendence. Does that sound familiar? The mountaintop isn't necessarily divine light. It might be what happens when the ego's control system goes temporarily offline. So there is a way to demythologize the Transfiguration story. It's likely that it was just a story, a myth, but it could just have easily been based on something that really happened to some people. Something natural and scientific that really happened to people. And Peter building shelters, putting up a tent or two, that's the ego panicking. It's the brain trying to reassert structure in the face of boundary loss. It's the brain saying, whoa, hold up, let's stabilize this. Let's contain this. Let's make this permanent. But you can't live with the default mode network shut down. It's not sustainable. You'd lose your functional identity. The brain always comes back online. And when that happens, you suddenly find yourself back in the valley. Now, let's make this even more uncomfortable. In the 1980s and 90s, Dr. Michael Persinger developed what became known as the God helmet. It used weak magnetic fields to stimulate the temporal lobes in a person's brain. Can you guess what happened? Yeah, people reported sensed presences. They felt watched or guided. They felt surrounded by something larger than themselves. Some people insisted they felt the presence of a dead relative. Some insisted they felt the presence of God. Some felt cosmic unity, not because the universe split wide open, but because the temporal lobes were being stimulated. Now, let's add a bit of chemistry to the mix. During peak experiences, the brain floods with neurochemicals. Dopamine, serotonin, endogenous opioids. The brain almost literally lights up. Meaning feels amplified. Colors feel more intense. Thoughts feel more profound. That radiance of the Transfiguration, it could very easily be the subjective effect of a brain that's awash in neurotransmitters. So here's the humanist provocation, if you will. If we can trigger transfiguration with a magnet or a molecule, does that make the experience fake? Or does it mean the sacred is actually a biological capacity? Religionists will usually react very defensively here. How dare you reduce this to brain chemistry? But everything you experience, love, grief, music, justice, compassion, all of it runs through brain chemistry. Explaining the mechanism doesn't erase the meaning. If anything, it should help clarify it. If the mountaintop experience can be induced, then it's not reserved for prophets. It's part of our human hardware, which means the real question isn't, was it supernatural? The real question is, what do we do with it? All right, now let's talk about the tent, the shelters that Peter wanted to put up. Why does Peter want to stay? Well, it's likely because the mountaintop feels pretty damn good, really good. The dopamine loop is powerful. Insight like that is intoxicating, and awe is addictive. You feel chosen. You feel expanded. You feel important. But here's the psychological trap. And that's spiritual bypassing. That's a term psychologists use for when people use spiritual or intellectual experiences to avoid dealing with real-world responsibilities. Think meditation instead of therapy, or prayer instead of actual reconciliation. Or hell, thoughts and prayers instead of justice and effective policy changes. God told me instead of critical thinking. They use spirituality, the language of spirituality, to bypass real-world responsibilities. And let's be honest, Christian nationalists, they are masters of this. They talk about divine destiny while ignoring human suffering. They claim mountaintop revelation while legislating cruelty down in the valley. They build massive metaphorical tents, churches, institutions, platforms, and then hide in them while real people struggle down below. But evolutionary biologists have something fascinating to say about awe. Awe likely evolved to make us feel small so we could cooperate in large groups. When you experience awe, that feeling of wonder and awe, your sense of self shrinks, but your sense of belonging expands. That's not mystical fluff. That's our very human cooperative wiring. Awe exists to increase pro-social behavior. So if you experience awe and then retreat into isolation or power consolidation, you've subverted the very reason your brain evolved that capacity. Yes, the tent is comfortable, but it's a misuse of the experience. Now, here's the hopeful part. Peak experiences don't just feel good. They can rewire you. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, is heightened during intense emotional states. Studies show that awe increases empathy. It decreases tribal bias. It increases generosity. It expands moral concern. Think about astronauts describing the overview effect. It's seeing Earth from space. It dissolves national boundaries in their minds. They come back. These astronauts come back to Earth changed. That's not divine intervention. That's neural recalibration. The mountaintop can be a reset. It's like a physical hardware reboot for the ego. And here's the ethical pivot. The reset isn't the goal. The integration of the reset into your everyday life, that's the goal. And this is where I'm going to be blunt. For centuries, religion has treated transfiguration-like moments as rare gifts for special people. Right? Prophets, saints, chosen ones. But science suggests it is a latent biological capacity in every single one of us, which means the real scandal isn't whether the light was supernatural. The real scandal is that we've become awe-junkies. We chase the high through worship services, through intellectual superiority, or things like meditation retreats. Hell, psychedelic tourism is a thing now. Or we can do it through art or activism branding. Right? We chase the feeling of illumination, and then we avoid the valley. If you have seen the light, in whatever form, you have a neurobiological debt. A debt to the people who are still in the dark. Your enlightenment is not a private luxury. It should be a public utility. Let me say that again. Your enlightenment is not a private luxury. It should be a public utility. Christian nationalists love mountaintop language. They talk about revelation, destiny, divine calling. But if your revelation results in cruelty, if your If your calling, your divine calling, results in exclusion, or if your vision, your destiny requires domination, that's not transfiguration. That's ego inflation. And the brain can inflate ego just as easily as it can dissolve it. The real test of the mountaintop isn't how bright the light was. It's how much of that light survives the descent. Because the valley is messy. The valley is taxes and immigration policy and caring for aging parents or building institutions that actually serve people. The valley is where we need to repair harm. It's the idea that we have to choose cooperation over tribal victory. The valley is where integrity lives. So here's the closing argument. For centuries, we've asked whether the light was real. We read the Transfiguration story and we ask, did it really happen? Science says the light is a built-in feature of the human nervous system. So the better question is this: are you using your mountaintop moments to justify superiority? Or are you using them to empower and fuel your service to others? Because if awe evolved to make us cooperate, then the highest expression of the sacred isn't glowing on a hill. The highest expression of the sacred is descending into the mud with your empathy intact. The question isn't how bright you shine when everything is radiant. The question is how much light you carry when it's dark, bureaucratic, boring, and just frickin' hard. If you've experienced clarity, if you've felt that feeling of unity or think you've glimpsed something larger than yourself, good. Good for you. Now, go pay your debt. Go wire that experience into compassion. Turn it into courage. Make it show up as cooperation, because the brain gave you the mountaintop for a reason. And it wasn't so you could build a tent. All right, thanks for joining me for this episode of Afterthoughts. If you want to keep up on everything I'm doing, please head over to thecodaproject.com and subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get notifications whenever I publish anything, and I'll keep you updated on the weekly live streams of mythologizing the Bible. If you subscribe for free over at thecodaproject.com, you'll start receiving my publication called The Weekly Compass. This is a brief guide on a single core value. Think of it as a mini lesson plan for personal growth. It's perfect for families, students, and adults because I include discussion questions designed for different age groups. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to the Guide to Kitchen Table Activism, which is a detailed resource designed to help you be politically active from your own home. The guide explains why activism is important, the philosophy behind kitchen table activism, and the foundational values it supports before laying out how to use the tools you have to make your voice heard. The guide provides various tools, tactics, and templates for you to use, and it only takes 15 minutes a week. If you care about our democracy, our country, and our world, then I encourage you to check it out. While you're at it, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you'll start receiving my newsletter called The Kitchen Table Activist. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember to question everything, keep what's good, and live what matters.